All right, and we're recording. So tonight's guest is Professor David Yamane. Um, David, thanks a bunch for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to having some everyday conversation.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this for literal months. I love your YouTube channel. You have a video on there called "Gun Culture 2.0: How a Liberal Professor Became an Armed American." You have two different blogs. More, at least more than one blog. There's probably more out there. Um, you're also an author. This right here is your book, your latest book, "Concealed Carry Revolution: Expanding the Right to Bear Arms in America." Um, you also, if I'm not mistaken, you're a professor at Wake Forest and you teach sociology. Um,
That's,
and also, you're a competitive shooter, and oh my gosh, it's amazing.
well,
so,
I wouldn't say I'm a competitive shooter. So, I mean, I do try to shoot regularly, and I do try to develop my skills, but I don't think anybody's picking me on their competitive shooting team.
still, is better than what a lot of folks, you know. I still think it's amazing. So it's really cool. Um,
Yeah.
So let's see. Let's dive right into the book because I've gotten about halfway through this, and it's really, really short too. It's less than 100 pages. So, um, what can readers expect from Concealed Carry Revolution?
Yeah, so the origins of that book are really this broader project that I've been working on this idea of gun culture 2.0, the defensive core of American gun culture today, concept that I stole from Michael Bain. But when I first started learning about guns, concealed carry is obviously a major part of what's happening in the world of guns today. And I couldn't find any single source that really, in a short format, summarized kind of clearly and accurately the history of concealed carry laws in the United States, where we are today, and why that's important. So that was originally intended to be a chapter of a book, which I'm still working on the book, but big books take a lot longer. But I thought I need to get this information out while I still can. So I did undertake to self-publish that as a freestanding book. There actually, I see you have an edition. There's actually a revised edition that came out after that one. It's slightly revised, but um, yeah, it's still available on Amazon, and really is intended to for someone who doesn't know the history of concealed carry or doesn't know the current status of concealed carry to really get up to speed, fairly quickly. The other thing is, even since that was published, we've had the Bruin decision in the Supreme Court, which has really turned the whole concealed carry law situation into uh, a lot of uncertainty, with overturning New York State's carry laws likely to affect California and Massachusetts and New Jersey, and Hawaii. So I could actually update that book every 6 months if I had time and interest. But I think it's very accurate for when it was published in 2021.
I think you're covering some ground that's really important to cover. I think it's important that Americans that hold concealed carry permits and licenses to carry and things like that, I think is good to know the history behind such laws. Um, that way we can kind of see stuff that's coming down the pipe, in the future. Um, let's see. Um, it makes me wonder, like, what else is there as far as reading up on, you know, works that follow this genre. Like there's like Larry Correia has a book out there. Um, I think it's called, I forget what the name of it is. It's Second Amendment something.
Yeah, it's
So
a sort of defense of the Second Amendment.
in defense of the Second Amendment. Yeah. What else is there off the top of your head? Like, what else can you recommend to readers for learning more about how we how these rights have evolved?
Well, I think the interesting thing for me is I don't really position myself as a Second Amendment advocate. I'd really try to take the role of the sociologist and an observer, so that regardless of whether you're pro Second Amendment or, pro gun regulation, that you can read that my book and say, this is a factually accurate rendering of what the situation is. And I think it's the case. And one of the things that I struggle with is that most of the things that are published about guns in America are either, sort of defending gun rights or talking about how guns are ruining the country. Most of the sociologists are in the guns are ruining the country camp. Um, and, so I try to take the position of saying, hey, let's first try to understand what the actual empirical reality is, and that, it's not likely that guns are either the salvation of the country or the demise of the country, but really a much more complex phenomenon. And so, there are some books out there that seek to do be more descriptive, but a lot of books are really, making what I take to be sort of more polemical arguments, which is fine if that's what your intention is, but that's sort of not the ground that I try to work in.
I think that's one thing that I see a lot in your writings, in your book, and in your blogs. Um, I see that there's like a non-biased, a non-partisan approach to just looking at what the facts of the history are. Just this is how we got here,
Yeah.
and I think that's very refreshing.
That's, that I took the title of my YouTube channel of light over heat, and that's like actually been my motto since I started studying guns, because it is such a fraught issue. It's such a polarizing issue. I think for me, unfortunately, it's become a kind of partisan issue, with Democrats being, against guns and Republicans being for guns, when it really isn't a partisan issue, right? That the things that are important about guns, that, either for self-defense or recreation, hunting, those are all things that are nonpartisan. And, one of the things I try to represent is a kind of nonpartisan orientation toward recognizing the reality of guns, and from my perspective, the largely um, neutral to positive reality of guns, but also, that minority of guns that become problematic, whether it's homicide, suicide, injury, tormenting people. So, capturing the entire reality of guns is difficult. And, I've been doing this for 12 years now, and I still don't really know what I'm talking about. Um, but, I think it's really important. And we are oftentimes made to believe that you're either, with us or against us, and that comes from both sides in the gun debate.
Yeah. So there's one phrase that I borrowed from you, and I love this phrase, and it's that gun ownership is normal, and normal people own guns. And so, when I teach classes, and typically a lot of the classes we teach over at a local range, Top Gun Memphis. Most of the classes are what you would call gateway instruction. Just this might be the first day that these students have ever seen a real gun in real life, right here in front of them, and it may even be the first day that they actually shot one. So that phrase right there gives them a lot of freedom. It really empowers them, because it's like, I'm not part of the fringe convert, well, I'm not part of the fringe population. This is normal.
Yeah. And this really comes out of my background, which is, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, totally outside of gun culture. Went to graduate school, college and graduate school in sociology, which isn't, overloaded with gun owners. And so, for most of my life, 40 years of my life, I really had never seen, touched, or fired actual firearm. And it wasn't until I got to North Carolina in 2005 that I started noticing, lots of people seem to have guns. You see gun shows advertised, concealed carry classes advertised, billboards about the shooting range. Start talking to the guy you play tennis with who's in IT, and he's got a couple Glocks. And the other guy who's, does marketing for the local hospital, he's got a couple rifles. Your real estate agent carries a revolver in her purse, and you start to get to the point where you're like, I think I'm the only person in North Carolina that doesn't have a gun. And, so my whole initial approach into guns was from complete ignorance, but then to seeing the normality of it, right? Because, my IT buddy and my market research friend and my real estate agent are not lunatics. They're not deviants. They're not, you know, right wing insurrectionists or any other bad things that people think or associate with gun ownership. Um, so when I started studying it academically, which was kind of after I personally was introduced to guns, that was always my approach. My buddy Sean Sorrentino asked me like a few years in, he's like, "What is something that you learned about guns and gun owners that surprised you?" And I said, gun owners are people too. And that has sort of evolved into this idea of, guns are normal and normal people use guns. And, it's in a way like any saying, it can be trite, but I think there's a very deep truth there, and one that whenever I'm talking to either other sociologists, public health scholars, people in the gun community, people who are concerned about gun violence, um, I always try to begin there and say, look, we no, none of us here are for gun violence. None of us here are for suicide. None of us here are for kids hurting themselves. But at the same time, guns are normal. Most people who own guns will not shoot themselves or anybody else or allow a child to access their gun who shouldn't access that gun. And that's not newsworthy, right? The things that don't go wrong don't make the headlines, but they still need to be said.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Um, so on YouTube, there's your origin story basically. I I watch that. I want to say like maybe twice a year. I know it sounds weird, but but what it does is it really just kind of it's oddly typical of how folks, get into guns, particularly in urban environments. In rural environments is typically something that you're raised with, and then in urban environments, it's usually as a response to, you know, your own personal safety.
Yeah.
So, is that does that in line with what you've seen in your studies, or am I off base here, or what?
Yeah, I think that historically, and this is where that distinction between gun culture 1.0 and gun culture 2.0 kind of comes in, is that, historically, if the core of gun culture was hunting and recreational shooting and collecting, those are things that people were typically socialized into through family or potentially through military service. But as the core of gun culture has shifted towards self-defense, and I always have to add an asterisk for the amateur gun historians out there. Obviously, self-defense has always been a reason that people have owned guns. So I'm not saying that that's not the case. We're talking about kind of the center of gravity of gun culture. As that has shifted definitively towards self-defense since the 1960s, and really rapidly since the concealed carry revolution, it has brought more and more people into gun ownership who don't get into guns in that traditional path of family socialization or military socialization. And those people are often, or more often than historically, non traditional gun owners, right? So, urban gun owners, racial minorities, gender minorities, sexual minorities, marginalized people who have reasons to be concerned about, their security beyond just the general concerns that we all may have. And so, that does create a situation of many people like me, maybe not 42 years old, but definitely older folks who don't have any experience with firearms, all of a sudden being interested in firearms and then acquiring a firearm. And that, really does, sort of literally and figuratively change the complexion of gun ownership in America.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Um, so what kind of guidance, what kind of advice can you provide to folks that may have just recently picked up a firearm and are listening to this podcast right now, like your beginner gun owners, what kind of advice can you provide for them?
Yeah, I think you have to get some sort of education and training, right? It doesn't have to be a 3-day, 500 round, $800 defensive pistol course from some traveling trainer. Find someone in your local community who's either an existing gun owner or someone who is a professional gun trainer associated with a range or a gun store nearby, and take 30 minutes or 60 minutes and just learn the basics of safe gun handling, and marksmanship fundamentals. You don't have to become a highly proficient shooter, but you want to be safe, to understand how the gun works, to understand the rules of gun safety. If you don't have that available to you, as many people don't, for geographic constraints or economic constraints. There are channels available on YouTube, for example, and especially with the big surge in gun buying during COVID, people were trying to put out resources online for, this is how to safely handle a gun. These are the rules of gun safety. These are the basic principles of marksmanship. It's even things like loading and unloading a firearm is not things that people who don't have experience with firearms inherently know how to do. We have all seen people trying to load, cartridges into a magazine backwards, or trying to, insert the magazine backwards. They don't know how to rack the slide. So those are, some things that you can learn about, not even with a real person, but find those videos. The National Shooting Sports Foundation has videos available for new shooters. And, so I really say, some minimal level of education and training so you don't hurt yourself, you don't hurt other people, and you don't, um, people who shouldn't have access to your firearm to have access to your firearm. And I think that's probably another one, that figure out some way of safely storing or staging your firearm so people who shouldn't have access to it um, don't have access to it.
Absolutely. I think it was the year 2022. Just the city of Memphis alone had 1,300 guns stolen out of vehicles.
Yeah,
That's just 1 year, and that's a city of about a million or so people, give or take.
right.
So yeah, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Um,
And I know, when Carl Wren was on your show, he said, I think Houston had 4,000 guns stolen out of cars. And, in my neighborhood here in Winston-Salem, uh, you know, people just go car to car along the street. They pull door handles. They're looking for anything they can. Maybe they get some change. They maybe get an iPad or something if they're lucky, or if they're really lucky, someone's left a gun in the car. And, that is now a gun that went from, a good, you know, gun owner into the black market. That's definitely not what we need.
yeah, that's not ideal, not at all. Um, so one thing I've noticed just in my own travels and in my own time is one of the hardest things to do in relation to gun ownership and gun education is to introduce newer shooters to guns. Like your new gun owners, your new shooters. It is incredibly hard. But I see in your videos, you I mean, I want to say you're a natural at it, but you have a ton of education and adult learning. So like what kind of advice can you give to, to instructors as far as like coaching new students?
Yeah, yeah, you have to put yourself into the mindset of the new shooter, I think. And this is one of the things that maybe makes it a little bit easier for me to do this, is that it was, only 12 years ago that I was a new shooter. That I was a fully mature adult who had thought about a lot of things before I, ever fired a gun for the first time. So it's still pretty fresh in my mind, that I didn't shoot the gun because I was really super interested in guns. I shot the gun because I knew a lot of people in North Carolina had guns, and I didn't know how they worked, and they scared me. And so a lot of people who are gun trainers have a lot of experience with guns. It's much more natural to them, and so it's harder for them to get in that beginner's mindset. And not all, I think there are a lot of people who are super accessible, and I think the ones who end up teaching a lot of new students are ones who are able to approach it from that perspective. And I'm not a gun trainer. I have zero gun training certifications. I've taken a lot of courses. I'm a NRA certified range safety officer. But one thing I do is for the course I teach at Wake Forest called Sociology of Guns, every year for the last 9 years, I've taken my class to the gun range. And in recent years, I've been by myself and supervising the students at the range, shooting a 22 pistol, a 9 millimeter pistol, and an AR platform rifle. And so, my sort of, again, memories of being a new shooter translate into, knowing that those students, many of whom have never handled a firearm before, are frightened. They're terrifying. Their hands are shaking. They can't speak. And to try to make that first shot as comfortable as possible. You know, 22 Ruger Mark III pistol, right? Almost no recoil, almost no muzzle flash. Like they hardly know that they've shot it. And so that gives them a positive first introduction to what guns are about.
That's amazing work. I think it kind of it reminds me of now. I didn't go through this, but a lot of people in my generation went through this, especially in rural environments. They had gun safety classes in school, and if you went out to the school parking lot, a lot of the students had gun racks in their trucks, and some of them even had shotguns in them, and that was an oddly typical thing back then. I feel like those days are gone forever. They're probably not coming back. But I think that what you're doing with your class, that is absolutely incredible. So,
And other forms of outrage, and the one of the unfortunate things, and again, this is where some of the pitched battles that we have over guns in American society actually become a problem in terms of gun safety, is that for those who um, are want more gun regulation, the gun control side, the anti-gun violence side, whatever we want to call them. um, on the one hand, they're like, oh, people should be better trained, with firearms. They hate permitless carry, right? They hate shall issue carry states where there's not a training course required. But then if you say, hey, how about we offer gun training to everybody in middle school? And they're like, whoa, whoa, now, let's not get carried away. Like, we don't want actually people to have, experiences with firearms in general. We're just saying, like, you gun nuts who already have guns ought to be better trained. And so, I think I've talked some about kind of the gun community really views safety as being like safety with guns. How can you safely live with guns? How can you safely use guns? And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the gun control side really sees safety primarily as safety from guns, right? How can we
mm,
keep people as much as possible away from guns? And in a country with over 400 million guns and tens of millions of gun owners, that's just not realistic. I would much rather, have a child, whether they want to become interested in guns or not, at least know this is what a gun is. This is how it works. This is the trigger. Don't pull the trigger. Basic safety rules. And that's what I do with my students. They're not children. They're 18 to 22-year-old adults. But I say, look, I'm not taking you to the range because I want to convert you into gun nuts. I'm taking you to the range because guns are a reality. And we're going to be talking about guns all semester, and you're going to be talking about guns your whole life. Let's at least have some experiential understanding of what they are and how they work.
so, and those are really great points. Um, Excellent points. Now, as far as uh, the amount of rights that we have to carry here in America. We see permitless carry sweeping across the nation. More and more states are adopting permitless carry, my state included. I'm in Tennessee. And I find myself not really at odds with it because I don't think that the government should have a right to tell people where they can take their firearms and where they can exercise self defense. I do have a big problem with how they train. I just simply I don't like the idea that the government says, "Hey, you should have this many hours of training and it should follow this curriculum," because in my own experience, everywhere I've seen that the government dictates training, it's been vastly inadequate. So, what do you think is probably going to be the best way forward as far as keeping the government from dictating those things, that training, but still keeping people adequately trained?
Yeah.
I don't
I
I
think,
don't get it.
yeah. I mean, I think it's going to take a lot of voluntary responsibility on the part of, gun owners, the gun culture, the gun community, the gun training community, to ensure that by and large we remain responsible with our firearms. And the more we edge into irresponsibility, the more then there's going to be calls for and better arguments for more regulations. So like, let's safely store our firearms. Let's not leave our firearms in our cars so that we don't have laws passed like Ethan's laws that will mandate that we store our firearms safely in a particular way. So I think that the key in permitless carry states will be for gun owners to continue to be responsible in carrying their firearms in public. And we see, instances in which they're not, but I think those are very rare, right? Those are the exceptions that prove the rule, but they get so much attention, right, that they can easily get blown out of proportion. And again, this takes me back to my, guns are normal thing, as I say, like, hey, it's in general, people who concealed carry in public, whether permitted or permitless, generally are not creating, the crime that we're concerned about. They're not the source of the gun violence that we're concerned about. And same thing kind of with stand your ground and castle doctrine. Every time some knucklehead shoots someone through the screen door of their house because they're afraid, then people, I think rightfully get concerned. If my kid went to the wrong house and some idiot shot him, I would be pissed. Right. But I wouldn't say, therefore, castle doctrine laws or stand your ground laws are creating the problem. Right. So I think that, as a community, call out bad behavior, right? Try to educate as much as possible if we see bad behavior. And, again, take that responsibility internally so that it doesn't get imposed externally.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I agree. I think that's probably going to be the way forward. Um, so swapping over to the other side of the aisle because um, and I'm not really saying that there's one side of the aisle or the other because, like you said earlier, it's just the reality. Guns are here to stay, and I think that the anti-gun crowd. I'm inclined to agree with you in that the anti-gun crowd is looking for safety away from guns. Like, how do we get rid of these weapons of mass destruction? And
Mhm.
um, it's hard for me to have folks like that, you know, be in my own family and we get together on Thanksgiving and there we are on other sides of the table and we have
Mhm.
to talk about it. Um, so what can I tell, I don't know, my aunties and my cousins when they bring up gun control and, you know, and they look at me, the firearms instructor, the competitive shooter, the Marine Corps veteran, they look at me and they're like, what are we going to do about guns? Like, I don't have any answers for that. So what do you
Yeah.
think?
I've been a big proponent increasingly of having conversations across our divides because I just feel like we're becoming less and less able to do that, especially in this area of this era of social media, in which the algorithms feed us things that are designed to get us mad and then reinforce what we believe. So I'm a super proponent of face-to-face conversations or in group settings, in the context of family, and beginning every conversation with points of agreement. And I've been in a few conversations recently that have started that way. Instead of beginning with, on the left we have these people and on the right we have these people, now fight. To say like, hey, let's sit around a table, let's acknowledge where do we agree, right, and then work from agreement to where we disagree. But then it just sets a different tone. It's a recognition, that there is a lot of agreement, right? You and your family members probably will disagree and will always disagree on certain things. But what if you started with all of the things that you do agree about, right? That you love each other, right? That you want each other to be safe, that it's painful to see people being injured. And I think grizzled veterans of the gun debates oftentimes are so jaded that they react negatively to people who are have good intentions, right? Like my sister is extremely pained at the fact that elementary school children are being killed in school, right? As a normal human being should be, right? But when, so oftentimes the initial response for someone who's outside of gun culture is like, and look at the weapon that was used. It's crazy that someone should have access to that weapon that can be used to kill that many little kids all at once. And instead of just going, my guns, you're not going to take my guns, to say, I know this is absolutely atrocious. It's horrific. I can't even imagine what goes through the mind and the heart of someone who could do that. And even just taking that moment of acknowledgement, of expressing empathy, and of establishing that we both agree that this is terrible, I think changes the tone of what comes after that. And then you really have to listen, right? You have, if someone is saying like, I don't think that civilians should have weapons of war, right? Then you have to listen to that, and you have to understand where that person's coming from. And it may be out of a position of ignorance, right? But that doesn't mean that you have to lash out at that person for being so ignorant, right? I was ignorant about guns for most of my life. I'm educatable, right? And um, you know, so that agreement, empathy. Tony Simon, he always says, go 60%, right? Don't meet people halfway. Go 60%, right? And what if every gun owner went 60% in every conversation they had with someone who wanted to regulate guns more? Would it change things entirely? Absolutely not, right? Would it make things better? I do think so.
Yeah, I think we all can stand to go 60% on a lot of things. So that's very wise advice. Um, and it's right there in line with a lot of the stuff that you write about in your blogs. Um, so I'm familiar with what was it? So there's one website, Gun Culture 2.0. There's a couple of others out there. Would you mind touching on them?
Yeah. So, when I first started studying guns, 11 years ago now, I wasn't an expert in the area of guns. I had spent 20 years of my professional life becoming an expert in the sociology of religion. And I just burned out, like I had an intellectual midlife crisis. So I burned out on that. I said, I have to study something new. And it was right around this time where I was discovering guns. I was like, I'm just going to study guns. But I had no expertise. I had no standing in the field. I couldn't, publish as scholars ordinarily would. So I was like, hey, I'll start a blog, and I'll just start basically writing for myself, because I'm getting, 10 views on a post. I don't know that it even got 1,000 views for the whole first year, that I was posting. But little by little, people started following and reading, and so I developed an audience that way. But I realized at some point on this Gun Culture 2.0 blog that it was getting a little bit like insider pool, so I'm doing long pieces on gun training courses that I went to. And I thought, I need to try to reach out to people who are interested in guns, but not already committed to guns, and that really was my readership on the other blog. So I started this blog called Gun Curious, which was specifically designed for those people who wanted to know more about guns, and they just had this curiosity. Because one of the things that we oftentimes don't, really think about is, um, we don't know exactly what percentage of the population owns guns because people tend to underreport this on surveys. But let's just say about a third of individuals in the United States own guns. Right? It's probably more like 40%, but for convenience, let's say a third. Well, if you do a survey and you ask those people who don't own guns, that two-thirds, would you ever consider becoming a gun owner? Half of them say yes. So really, the country is divided into roughly a third of people who already own guns, a third of people, I call them the no-nos. I don't own a gun and I never would. But then there's a third of the population who don't currently own a gun, but would consider it, right? And I call them the gun curious. They are interested in guns. It may just take like a pandemic and the fear of social breakdown and concern about whether police can respond, and police murdering civilians and things like this that will move them from being gun curious to being gun owners. So, that blog, I, try to post things that are much more sort of just oriented towards, hey, are you interested in guns? Here's some things that you might, want to know about. And then I don't have a third blog. My third sort of major media is this YouTube channel that I started a little over a year ago now, I guess, called Light Over Heat. And, again, the idea being, trying to address a very controversial and divisive issue, in a way that brings light rather than just fostering anger. And so, I think the tone of that is similar to the blogs. It's just in a spoken word format. Try to keep the videos fairly short, 5 to 6 minutes. Sometimes they go to 10. You can't hold yourself back sometimes. But those come out when I'm doing well. Those come out every Wednesday, and lately I've been posting about my student field trip to the gun range. So if anybody's interested in what that looks like and how the students respond to it, those are the last 3 videos that I put up there.
I think I saw those videos and it was incredibly enlightening. I really did enjoy them. So
And
yeah,
let me say, like,
definitely.
I'm not a videographer. Like, these are not dynamic videos. I watch other people's videos, and this is me usually just standing in my office talking. And so, I just want people to be aware of that ahead of time, so they don't have expectations that they're going to be looking at, me sort of moving and shooting or anything exciting like that.
I kind of dig that kind of content. So yeah, we did touch on something that was really kind of interesting. It was an interesting phenomenon that we saw with COVID. Um, Folks that basically were not really no-nos. I think deep down in our hearts they were gun curious. They lined up around blocks to get guns, and what a lot of us are seeing in gun shops now is that a lot of these folks are now selling those same guns. Um, so it really kind of makes me wonder. Now, I think it was pretty obvious, like at the onset of COVID, that the demand was there, the market was going to respond, but we always kind of knew, hey, how long is it going to be before they sell all this stuff? And so on one side, it's like, okay, I'm waiting for that to happen so that I can start buying their Glocks for $300, you know. Um,
Right.
but on the other side, there's another side that was really kind of hoping that they would turn into lifelong committed gun owners, and we're frustrated. We're frustrated because number one, they're not, and they were never going to be. Well, a lot of them. I can't really give you any hard numbers. And then number two, I think that there's a reluctance or really kind of like an arrogance about it as far as, well, you don't see the need in your own self-protection and your personal safety, so you don't deserve compassion. I don't know, it just seems like there's this vitriol, there's these negative emotions towards those folks. So have you seen that? How do you feel about that? And like, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have data on it like you, but I do think probably people who are on the front lines in the gun stores who are seeing people, bringing back a $600 gun that they bought 2 years ago and realizing that they can only get $300 for it. That's probably where we get the best data. But yeah, to me, it is like, um, all of the fitness equipment and the Peloton bikes and the travel trailers that are going to be flooding the market that are very lightly used that people accumulated during COVID. So I think there's something very natural about that, right? That people are constantly thinking they're going to do something and end up not doing it, and just getting out. And it's probably better for some of those people to get out, right? Like if you purchased a gun because you thought it was going to be some sort of magic talisman that was going to keep danger away from you, and you stuck it in your bedside drawer in your closet or something, that really isn't making you any safer, and it may be making you less safe, if someone in your household gets hold of it, if someone comes in and steals it, whatever the case may be. So I'm not the kind of person who says like everybody should realize that they're in mortal danger and they need to have guns. I think that there are some people who probably shouldn't have guns, and I also respect the decision of people who choose not to have guns. Um, so I think there's that. The question is more, how do you access the people who would have liked to have kept guns but they didn't quite ever settle into feeling comfortable being gun owners. And it is a big challenge because those people tend to be new non-traditional gun owners, so they're not already networked into groups of people who are gun owners. I had the advantage when I got into guns of knowing a lot of people who were gun owners. So they weren't my colleagues in the sociology department. They weren't my family, but they were other people that I knew, and so they were able to help socialize me into gun ownership. So finding you know finding out who those people are is really hard. If we could do that, then we should connect with them. And it's again talking probably across divides that we don't often talk across. I get a lot of, as I became more sort of publicly known as a gun person, both at Wake Forest and in sociology. I now get a lot of people contacting me saying, "Hey, I'm thinking about getting a gun. Can you give me some advice?" Or could you take me to the range? Or I don't know why I feel like I need a gun. I need to talk to somebody about this. And so if we could sort of somehow become visible to those people who are otherwise don't know anybody who are gun people, then we can start finding some of those people who may have gone from gun curious to gun owner to non-gun owner, like in a period of 3 years.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I'm not going to come out here and say that we didn't do enough to retain those folks. I think that what happens is, just like the normal human beings that we are, it's just hard to meet them at 60%. And I think that if we had done that more, I don't know, at a more, then we may have been able to keep those folks. But I don't know if that's a question that we'll ever find the answer for. I'm not sure. I think we could just probably just move forward. So,
Like I mean, I think of like one of the front lines for people who are getting into guns is the local gun store, right? And there are some local gun stores that are welcoming, and there are some local gun stores that are anything but welcoming. And I think that's an area in which we could figure out how to take those unwelcoming gun stores and make them more welcoming. that I think would help, some of those people to feel more comfortable, right? Like they go in, they buy a gun, they get out as fast as possible because that's not a space that they're used to working in. But, they had a decent vibe about it. So maybe then they go back and, shoot a little bit on the range. Right. And then maybe they're like, oh, well, that wasn't so bad. So I see they're offering a first shots course. Maybe I should try that. Whereas, I walk into too many, gun stores, that basically blaring Fox News on the TV, and they've got a Trump 2024 flag hanging there. And I'm like, I'm out. Like, I mean, it's not like I don't talk to people on the other side of the political aisle. I just don't need that. Right. I don't need that in my gun space. Right. Like you want to fly the flag at your house or on your car or whatever, that's freely expressing your political beliefs, which is fine, but that's not going to create an atmosphere that's very welcoming to people who aren't already in agreement with you.
Yeah, and I'm 100% agreement in that. Absolutely. So, um, well, David, I think we're kind of running low on time. I This is one of those conversations that I just absolutely thoroughly enjoyed, and I'm going to come back and listen to this over and over and over again. Was there anything else that I should have asked that I probably should have, or any other passion projects that you're working on right now that you want to talk about?
I'll tell you, I do want to say that I, after a long time coming, have found a publisher for a book I'm bringing out. It's going to be hopefully called Gun Curious, right? A journey into America's evolving culture of firearms. The manuscript is due to the publisher on November 1st. I'm currently working on the last substantive chapter, which covers gun training, which is extremely difficult because I've spent hundreds of hours observing and participating in gun training over the last decade. But if all goes well, that book is going to come out maybe in May or June of 2024. And so hopefully I can come back in maybe April or May of 2024 and talk to you about it.
Let me know because I will gladly buy a copy. I might buy several copies, and I definitely want at least one of those to be autographed. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
definitely looking
Well,
forward to it.
yeah. Well, let's set up something where I come to you, and we can either go to your range or we find a local bookstore, and we'll do a reading and or a question and answer, and we'll sign a bunch of books.
That sounds phenomenal. Yeah, that sounds phenomenal. I think we can do that.
Cool.
So yeah. Now, if folks want to get a hold of you, if they have more questions, where can they find you?
So again, depending on what their orientation is, if you like the video format, lightoverheat.com. If you like, sort of insider pool blogs about gun culture, it's gunculture2.0.com. If you're more gun curious, or people who may be gun curious and want to direct them in that direction, that's guncurious.com. Or if you Google David Yamane, Wake Forest University, you can find my email address pretty easily and connect with me there. I mean, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. I got too much going on out there, too many different ways to reach me, in fact. But I love to hear from people out there, and they really do kind of sustain me in my work, because a lot of times, this I said today, I think that complexity is a niche market, and it's not everybody has a taste for it. But if you have a taste for this kind of complexity, this desire to build bridges, this desire to dwell in this uncertain space, I'd love to be in touch with you.
Fantastic. All of those websites and links, I have these in my notes. I'm going to post them in the description of this video and on the podcast. That way you can look down there, and you can reach out to David if you like to. So that'll all be there. And tell you what, David, I really just, this was a ton of fun. Thanks so much for coming out. I am honored. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. These are the kinds of everyday conversations that I think we should all be having all the time, even when the camera's not on.
I agree. And folks, if you're watching or you're listening, I just want to let you know how much we appreciate you spending your time with us. You could have spent your time doing anything, uh, or working some extra hours, or spending time with your family. The fact that you're sharing it with us is something that is not lost on us, and I definitely appreciate it. So thank you. Welcome to Memphis.